I stopped paying rent, armed with proof of neglect, and after a tribunal battle, scored 9 months free rent, $13,000 won. This will be somewhat lengthy as context is necessary. I intend to include a significant amount of information to facilitate understanding. I will insert where the actual story begins in case anyone wishes to bypass the preliminary details. Minor specifics may not be entirely precise, as I have no desire to reignite this conflict in any way. I won completely, and any revival could only compromise the experience. We will commence by noting that I dedicated around 2 decades to the field of security. During that period, I handled various types of security across many different locations. The part relevant to this narrative is my time spent as a kind of bailiff at the rental housing tribunal in a major city. For those unfamiliar, envision a courtroom in a major city at least. In a smaller town, it may resemble an event space in a hotel or community center, as depicted on television, but with less formality and an adjudicator instead of a judge. Functionally, they serve the same purpose for landlords and tenants, but they are indeed different. This venue exclusively addresses landlord and tenant disputes and is the sole authority for resolving such conflicts. It's important to clarify that I wasn't a bailiff, nor was it an actual court, but these terms fairly accurately represent the situation and my role within it. For 2 years, I served at the rental housing tribunal, which was early in my security career when I was around 18 to 20 years old. Being in a major city, the vast number of cases I observed was beyond my capacity to tally. I witnessed every possible scenario. No individual can surprise me with a tale because I have encountered every one of them. In detail, as one of my additional responsibilities was ensuring that all parties received copies of all evidence presented. I frequently photocopied documents and consistently reviewed everything I copied to ensure nothing was cut off or rendered illegible. By the time I left that position, I likely understood the workings of the system well enough to serve as an adjudicator myself. Well, not really, but I certainly would not need a lawyer, should I ever require representation there. I also possessed thorough knowledge of how the system functioned beyond just the official rules. For instance, adjudicators consistently provided a little leeway for individuals representing themselves compared to those with legal counsel. Additionally, I saw how aggravated adjudicators became when a party spoke out of turn. Seriously, do not do that. Fast forward nearly a decade. I relocated from the city to a fairly large town in the same province. The tenant laws remain unchanged. I share a reasonably sized townhouse with a few roommates. We coexist amicably. However, there is a complication. Only I am able to write checks and our paydays do not align. Consequently, I am the one making the rent payment, and I typically cannot do it on the first because not all my roommates pay on time. We inform the landlord that we may be a day or 2 late, but we assure them we will have it by the 3rd at the latest. They have never had an issue with this. I discussed it with them personally. For approximately a year, this arrangement worked well. No complaints from the landlord, because even though we were often a day or 2 late, we always settled our payments. We were also relatively quiet and caused no damage to the property. Nearly model tenants. For reasons unknown, this suddenly changed one day. I suspect a different individual within the company began overseeing the area. One day, out of the blue, we received a summons to the rental housing tribunal, hereafter referred to as RHT, on the 2nd of the month for failure to pay rent. This didn't actually result in a case since we paid on the same day. However, we now had to cover the application fee the landlord incurred to issue the summons. I expressed my frustration to the neighbor, who also served as the superintendent, and eventually learned that their contact at the company was now insisting on payments being made on the 1st of the month, with no exceptions. Well, that arrangement simply did not work for us, so we probably had to pay that fee 15 to 20 times over the subsequent 2 years. I could have pursued the matter in tribunal, but we were technically without a strong argument, and I understood that. Perhaps if I attended enough times, I could claim they were harassing us, but I lacked the time for that, and my roommates were indifferent. Even with the fee divided among us, it wasn't enough to deter our behavior, so we accepted it. If this had been the sole issue, there wouldn't be much of a story. Around the same time the flexibility with rent disappeared, so did necessary maintenance. I won't enumerate everything that went wrong and remained unfixed, but you will have a fair understanding by the end. We endured the situation. We were all working excessive hours at low-paying jobs to effectively address the problems. We adapted. However, after about 2 years, everything fell apart. Everyone except me moved out for various reasons over a 4-month span. I won't elaborate on my roommates, as circumstances escalated for several reasons outside of this situation. There's no need to revisit any of that. Having saved for a while, I managed to resign from my job without the urgent need to find another, so I suddenly had a significant amount of time. I did not wish to remain and pay rent alone or search for new roommates I could tolerate, and with my background in the RHT, I recognized that I had the landlord in a vulnerable position. Thus, I took action against them. I ceased paying rent. Unfortunately, I didn't receive a summons the first month. However, the second month I did. So, I attended the tribunal, armed with meticulously documented evidence of their failure to maintain the property and their unauthorized entry without proper notice. I brought copies for both the landlord and the adjudicator. From my experience, I knew that technically, you were required to provide the other party with evidence before the tribunal, but I was also aware of the leeway adjudicators grant to self-represented individuals. Thus, I withheld the evidence from the landlord until our case was presented complete ambush. They argued they were caught off guard, but the adjudicator simply dismissed their case, mildly chastised me, and advised me to file my own summons as I should have done. That was my petty revenge. The landlord and lawyer drove 3 hours for nothing, worse than nothing. I submitted my own summons, and the day of the hearing arrived. At this point, I had not paid rent for about 4 months. I was prepared to pay if I lost, but I was confident that I would not. The entire proceeding unfolded flawlessly. I presented 20 to 30 pages of evidence and around 20 photographs. They had nothing. They had no valid defense for our water heater being inoperative for 6 months or for us lacking a refrigerator for a year, just to name 2 significant issues. Their entire defense hinged on our late rent, which ultimately worked against them, as it led the adjudicator to discover how many times we had paid the application fee, alongside unsupported falsehoods. They even spoke over me multiple times, and I could see it in his eyes the one time I attempted to protest during their speaking turn, but I forced myself to remain silent with all the willpower I possessed, allowing only a whisper to escape. The adjudicator respected me. He held no regard for the landlord. I had triumphed on every conceivable front. The only question was how much. It surpassed anything I had ever witnessed. I received 9 months of free rent, and the landlord was mandated to rectify all maintenance issues before the end of the following month, or I would receive more. I provided notice of my departure at the end of the 8th month and moved out at the conclusion of the 9th. Because the landlord never renewed the lease, I was not obligated to provide the 3-month notice specified in the lease agreement. In terms of a numerical value, I essentially received a judgment in my favor amounting to $13,000 when adjusted for inflation and rounded. I also made the landlord and his lawyer drive 3 hours, not once, but twice, only to face defeat. The landlord's face was so flushed at the conclusion, I thought he might suffer a heart attack. However, he did not. Goodbye, Mark. Edit to clarify a few points based on inquiries. I also wish to express my empathy for those responsible landlords out there. I understand your perspective. My experience at the RHT was enlightening. For every poor landlord, there are easily 10 problematic tenants. There is a vast debate to be had over the entire situation, and I only want to say that I do empathize with the decent landlords. I am not attempting to portray all landlords negatively. This is the only landlord I have encountered who was utterly ineffective. Edit, I have revised my estimate of the ratio based on some research and comments, reducing it from 30 tenants per landlord to 10. I may still be mistaken, but the stark disparity in numbers between landlords and tenants effectively necessitates that there are more bad tenants than bad landlords, simply because there are significantly more tenants than landlords. I will leave it at that, and simply request that you refrain from harshly criticizing me from either perspective. I am acutely aware of the challenges both good landlords and good tenants face, and I extend my sympathy to both parties. Story 2. Homeless, I hit my husband during a meltdown, screaming to die while driving. I'm terrified of the switch that takes me over. I apologize for the length of this message. I appreciate everyone who chooses to read it through to the conclusion. I completely understand that I am not a good person and that my husband deserves far better than what I have managed to provide. To begin with, I, 27 female, and my husband, 32 male, share a strong relationship aside from my outbursts and challenging mental health issues. We truly cherish each other's company. He is my closest friend and I am his. We rejuvenate one another. We have fun together, communicate openly, and share everything with each other. We engage in various activities together and never grow weary of one another's presence. We have always been able to calmly discuss our feelings following an argument or one of my outbursts. We support one another and earnestly strive to offer what we lacked in our upbringing. He is the first person in my life who genuinely understands me. He sees beyond my depression and emotional eruptions. He values me more than I have ever witnessed anyone value another person. I hold him in high regard. Although both of us are on the autism spectrum, I am the only one who experiences outbursts. He tends to shut down instead. For those who have never witnessed an autistic meltdown, it generally involves significant shouting, repetitive physical movements, such as rocking, hitting oneself, hand flapping, etc., repeated phrases, saying the same things repeatedly, and a very rigid mindset. It can be extremely difficult to reach the individual experiencing the meltdown. Unfortunately, my husband is hurt in some way about 90% of the time, usually through hurtful words. Just before my menstrual cycle begins, typically about a week prior, these outbursts worsen dramatically. I mean, they become exponentially more intense. My usual meltdowns are always triggered by something specific: sensory overload, my pathological demand avoidance being activated, emotional dysregulation, hunger, thirst, etc. However, we have yet to identify a specific trigger for the extreme outbursts that occur before my periods. We have started referring to these as switches, as it feels akin to a switch being flipped. There is no known cause for them, and they differ from my typical autistic meltdowns. It genuinely feels as though I become an entirely different person. During these episodes, I feel trapped in a glass enclosure within my own mind, observing as someone else controls my actions. I witness myself saying and doing terrible things while screaming internally for myself to stop, pleading not to utter or perform the actions I am taking, pounding against the glass, desperately seeking to be heard. It feels like watching a film. I say and do things that are entirely out of character for me. These severe outbursts began a few years back. During the first incident, I threw my wedding and engagement rings at him, claiming I no longer wanted to be with him. I accused him of no longer caring for or loving me. Each subsequent outburst has escalated in severity. The most recent episode was by far the most extreme I have ever experienced. I have never laid a hand on my husband until this occasion. To set the scene, we are currently homeless, living in our car with our dog. My husband began suffering from seizures and lost his job, which led to our current predicament. I won't delve too deeply into that for now, but it is significant for understanding my situation. In this episode, I began shouting that I could no longer live in the car, expressing my discomfort and need for a change. I kept crying out for help, asking why he was not assisting me. I likely repeated those demands for a good 30 minutes or longer. The details are hazy for me. After that, things deteriorated rapidly. I am presently feeling suicidal. During this breakdown, I expressed a desire to die, asserting that I could no longer endure the situation, that my existence was meaningless, and that my absence would be better for everyone. Naturally, he attempted to console me, professing his love and how lost he would be without me. My response was to suggest that I would just block the exhaust pipe with snow, so we could all perish together. At least with carbon monoxide poisoning, we would die in our sleep, thereby ending all our suffering immediately. Typically, when I start exhibiting signs of an impending meltdown, we have him walk away, as I would prefer to vent my frustrations at myself rather than have him serve as the target. However, that option was limited since we were confined in the car. Somewhere, my memory is fragmented. For reasons I can't recall, we decided to go pick something up from a store, with me driving. We both feel uneasy about him taking the wheel since his seizures began. I said some truly awful things during that drive, while he remained mostly silent. Feeling neglected triggered something deep within me, and I began to shout at him to stop ignoring me. The details are again a bit foggy, but I ended up hitting him several times and even threatened to crash the vehicle. I have never struck him before, never. But in that moment, I did. I do not think I will ever forgive myself for that. Honestly, I am astonished we were not pulled over, as I was speeding and swerving while shouting. I must have appeared completely unstable. I severely jeopardized our lives. For what reason? I remain clueless. I cannot comprehend this event or my actions. My typical meltdowns do not manifest this way. After each outburst, we usually sit down to discuss it. He tells me what I said or did that caused him pain. We take a deep dive to explore the origins and triggers of these outbursts. We engage in aftercare for him. I make space for him to voice his pain, and I do my utmost to offer reassurance and formulate actionable changes for the future. I have been creating an insecurity map, which is essentially a chart of my insecurities and their origins. When my husband notices the early signs of a potential trigger, he prompts me with, "What is the insecurity?" We then sit down and analyze the situation, working together to uncover the reasons behind my distress and engaging in activities designed to help me manage my emotions, such as butterfly tapping, meditation, mapping insecurities, and basic mindfulness. This greatly assists in alleviating my autistic meltdowns. However, it does not seem to mitigate the switches. Overall, I experience a meltdown perhaps once or twice each month, including the switches, which is more frequent than before. Previously, I experienced them roughly once a month, but their occurrence has increased over the past year. Again, the switches arise every time just before my menstrual cycle. I am now utterly terrified of my period. Regrettably, my menstrual cycles are incredibly irregular. I have attempted to track them to anticipate the switches, but so far, this method has failed. I fear for my own self, but more importantly, my husband is scared of me, and our dog is afraid of me too. We are both anxious about the possibility of a switch occurring. I have been trying fervently to recognize when I feel one coming on. I have worked diligently on being mindful and identifying my emotions. It is challenging to determine how I am feeling. Usually, I can only identify my emotions when they become unbearable, leading to situations like not realizing I am hungry until I am starving or not noticing thirst until my mouth is dry and my lips have cracked. I urgently need help. I am unsure how to obtain it. I cannot leave my husband alone in the car, especially given the cold weather and the fear of him experiencing another seizure. He could easily face life-threatening consequences if someone is not available to assist him. If my husband and our dog had a proper shelter, I would feel more comfortable seeking help, knowing that addressing my own needs would ultimately benefit him as well. I have dealt with suicidal thoughts for an extended period, stemming from the distress and anguish I have inflicted upon him through my meltdowns and switches. I have suppressed these thoughts, understanding the devastation it would cause him. However, I now hold a deeply ingrained belief that they would be better off without me. I struggle with self-forgiveness. I do not know how to move forward and seek assistance without jeopardizing my family's safety. I am acutely aware of how badly this reflects on me. I have abused my husband. I have yelled at him. I struck him. I felt compelled to express this openly. I have a clear understanding of how the comments are likely to unfold. I am fairly certain I can predict the hurt they will cause me. I simply needed to communicate with someone, anyone. My husband is my only confidant. He is the focal point of my entire existence, and I have deeply wounded him. I feel as though I have crushed him. We typically engage in discussions like we do following other meltdowns. I know precisely how much I have hurt him. I genuinely despise myself for the pain I have caused. I am terrified of it recurring, and so is he. I can see him attempting to carefully choose his words and excessively apologizing out of fear. I do not blame him. I could have harmed him severely or even our dog. This gnaws at me. I am afraid to speak, afraid to take any actions that could trigger another switch. I require assistance. I need to enter a hospital for treatment, but I do not know how to navigate that in our current situation. I feel as though I am pulling us both deeper into despair. I am striving so hard to be all right, but I am not. I am at a loss for how to proceed. Story 3. I cut concrete for a living, And when told to slow down, we dragged a job meant for 3 days into 3 weeks, earning $200,000. I recently discovered this subreddit, and I believe I have an intriguing story to share. This occurrence took place approximately 2 years ago. I am employed in the construction industry, specifically in concrete cutting. Many individuals are not familiar with what I do, but it is essential to understand that I do not engage in pouring concrete. Instead, I utilize large diesel and hydraulic-powered saws to cut and remove it. I work for a relatively small company with 15 employees, and we are known as the premier choice for concrete cutting and removal in our locality. I was the first individual hired at this company, and my supervisors are exceptional, having been in the industry for 25 and 30 years, respectively. For the sake of this narrative, we will refer to them as Brad and Cody. They possess extensive knowledge of their field, still work hands-on in the field, and can easily outpace any of our other workers. We were awarded a no-bid contract to cut and remove a substantial section of an outdoor slab at a significant facility due to cracking. This type of project was routine for us. We could complete it almost instinctively, yet it still represented a considerable undertaking. The reason we received the contract without a specific price was that the facility wanted the work done correctly and promptly, and they recognized that we were the right team for the job, even if we were not the most affordable option. The client asked us to bring additional equipment and specialized saws as a precautionary measure, which becomes important later. The designated day for us to commence work arrived, and they requested our presence on site at 6:30 a.m. for a safety meeting. Brad and Cody headed out while I remained behind to prepare my crews for the day before joining them. When I arrived at 8 a.m., they were still by their trucks, engaged in conversation. I inquired about the safety meeting, and they informed me that no one from the other company had appeared yet. They finally arrived around 9 a.m. without acknowledging their tardiness. We were introduced to the project manager, named John. During the safety meeting, John mentioned there would be a few individuals from his company present to oversee our work. Although we found this odd, we dismissed it as no major issue. We conducted our own safety meeting afterward, and it was time to start working. We managed to complete about 1/3 of the project on the first day. Throughout our work, there were consistently at least 25 people observing us. We jokingly suggested that they set up bleachers for better viewing. They insisted we stop working at 4 p.m. so they could leave for the day. At that point, we began to sense something was amiss. They seemed unconcerned that we had started late or that they wanted us to end early, despite the need for fast completion being a significant reason for our presence. Nevertheless, we believed we could finish in around 3 days and earn a good profit. The following morning, as we were preparing for the day, Brad received an email. It stated, "While we acknowledge that your company operates effectively with its machinery, we feel you are working unsafely by operating multiple machines simultaneously and request that you slow down to ensure safe working conditions. Additionally, you did not confirm that our supervisors felt safe throughout the day." Brad was furious. We had been expressly instructed to complete the project quickly, and at no point had we acted in an unsafe manner. Upon arriving at the site for the safety meeting that day, Brad shifted from thinking, "These individuals don't understand our work," to, "If we are too fast, we'll slow it down for them." During the safety meeting, John, the same individual who sent the email, looked at us and said, "Okay, we all know what we are doing. Let's get started." He attempted to conclude the safety meeting, but that's when my boss interjected. He stated, "Hold on, since no one has the courage to communicate this in person and prefer to hide behind emails, let us clarify this. We are too fast and unsafe for you." John visibly squirmed and stammered, "Well, there were a lot of people watching you yesterday. I just felt someone might get hurt if they got too close." I had set up safety cones with red danger tape between them and instructed everyone not to cross these boundaries. We had implemented proper safety measures. If they were uncomfortable with so many observers, then they should not allow so many individuals to stand around, observe, and do nothing. Brad simply replied, "Okay, we will proceed slowly, and if anyone crosses our line, we will halt the site for an hour to conduct another safety meeting." Now it was time for some deliberate compliance. We got started for the day. It is worth mentioning that our saws, tractors, and other heavy equipment have the capability to adjust the idle speed, allowing us to slow down the operating speed of the motors. Hence, instead of everything functioning at its usual rapid pace, it was reduced to a crawl. Brad instructed us that if we increased the speed of our machines, he would dismiss us from the job, including Cody, his business partner. I was sawing while Cody operated the excavator to remove the cut sections, and Brad used the skid steer to transport the pieces to the dump truck. I would typically cut a piece of concrete measuring 6 feet by 6 feet within 20 to 30 minutes, but this task was now taking upwards of 3 hours per piece. After my cut, Cody would engage his excavator, slowly turn and stop, extend his bucket, stop, lower the bucket, stop, tilt the bucket, stop, pick up the piece, stop, turn, stop, drop the piece, stop, and finally turn off his machine, all without increasing the idle speed. Brad would then start his machine and repeat the same painstakingly slow process to load the dump truck. It was agonizingly sluggish. After the first piece was ready for removal, and Cody began this process, John, who was merely observing with a pale face, crossed my boundary to ask if we were genuinely serious. At that moment, Brad shouted, "Shut down," and we all stepped back for an hour for another safety meeting. John crossed the line 3 times on the first day and a total of 8 times throughout the project. His employees never once crossed the danger line. Essentially, John was the one who should have been concerned about being too close and in danger. John continued to exclaim, "There is no way you guys are serious." "What happened to the efficiency you displayed yesterday?" Brad replied. "I have in writing that you expressed feeling unsafe, so for the remainder of this project, we will be operating at a safe pace." Ultimately, it took us 3 weeks to complete the job at this painfully slow speed instead of the expected 3 to 4 days at full capacity. The best part: the facility manager came to inspect what was causing the delay, and we shared the email with him. He agreed with our approach and mentioned that he despised John, finding him unbearable to work with. He explained that the success of this project was directly linked to John's annual bonus. He then inquired about our billing, and we explained that we charged per piece of equipment, truck, and saw on site by the hour, revealing that John had requested we bring nearly twice as much equipment as we actually needed. The facility manager laughed and said, "Fantastic, I will ensure you receive full payment. Don't hold back on the invoice." That is how we complied maliciously, and ended up charging approximately $200,000 for a project that realistically should have been valued at around $45,000. I even received a generous bonus of $20,000 because Brad and Cody are exceptional bosses who recognized the financial success we achieved on that job. Update: I wanted to clarify a few points after reviewing the comments. First, yes, John attempted to persuade us to revert to our previous work rate, but he only ever made verbal requests. My boss kept insisting, "I need that in writing and you have a deal. You might even save some money in the process." However, John either did not grasp his implication or was unwilling to send an email rescinding his statement for fear of appearing foolish. Second, this was a significant project, larger than my specific role. However, considering John's behavior toward us, I would seriously question whether every other aspect of the job went smoothly for him. I assume they made some profit, but certainly not as much as they would have without John, which likely meant he still received a bonus, albeit a small one. Third, regarding the number of people standing around and watching for 3 weeks without working by the end of the 3rd week, there were probably only 10 observers left, but given that this facility employs hundreds, having 25 people at a time sneak out for most of the day to watch us was manageable for them. They would usually rotate, so if we saw someone one day, we typically would not see them again for about a week. Additionally, another satisfying moment in the story that I should have mentioned is that Cody has always said since the first time I worked with him, "We aren't trying to retire off of this one job. We are treating the customer fairly, but fair isn't always inexpensive." After the facility manager authorized us to charge appropriately and encouraged us not to take it easy, Cody looked at us and remarked, "Yep, we are retiring from this one." Although it was meant humorously, the satisfaction I derived from hearing him say that, knowing his fair-mindedness throughout our decade-long relationship, is unparalleled. Story 4. My boss fired my friend for theft, so I reported unsafe conditions. Both bakeries shut down. OMG, I just ruined their business. A little background: my supervisor manages 2 bakeries. One of them is significantly more profitable than the other, which has practically been neglected. It produces a minimal quantity of bread, and I will elaborate on that later. I am employed as a baker at a prominent baking franchise in Australia, and I had been enjoying my role until recently when a colleague left after having a baby, and a new person was brought in to take his place. Oh dear, this new individual is a real piece of work. He is the worst colleague I have ever had the misfortune to collaborate with. Within roughly 2 months, I found myself essentially banished to the lesser store, a place I had never worked before. I was genuinely apprehensive about it for some time. This newcomer had been exhausting everyone and had ingratiated himself with the management quite effectively. When I arrived at the sister bakery, I was honestly taken aback. The output was minimal, and it was generally viewed as a joke at the primary location, and it was easy to see why. Half of the oven was either non-functional or had damaged elements preventing it from heating up. The mixing bowl emitted a dreadful noise when activated, indicating it desperately needed bearing replacement. The proofers contained large, gaping holes that pooled with water daily, and the baker present, whom we will refer to as Steve, had reached his limit. Steve had been employed there for about 3 years and was completely unaware that the new guy had even joined the team, yet he knew him well. It turned out that both he and the new hire had been apprentices at the same bakery until the new hire was dismissed for theft. You can probably guess how this story unfolds. I worked at the sister store for about 6 months, navigating the Easter season alongside Steve, and it was brutal. Trays were not replaced, some were broken. I couldn't even understand how that was possible. The proofers continuously leaked, requiring mopping during shifts, and the ancient non-slip flooring, so worn that it was dangerously slick, had numerous cracks, resulting in the odor of dirty, moldy water that no one could clean up because it seeped beneath the flooring material. It was disgusting. About 3 months ago, I received disheartening news. Josh, a good friend working at the main store, had been dismissed. A significant amount of cash, over $3,000, had gone missing from the location over a span of several months. There was no proof that Josh was responsible, but it became irrelevant. The new hire had gotten in the manager's ear, and gradually, Josh received warnings for the most minor infractions, most of which were not his fault. Ultimately, he was terminated after receiving an unjust third strike. He planned to take the matter to Fair Work Australia, but I had my own agenda. The first step was to enter the proofers with my phone, withdraw it from my pocket, and take a clear photograph of the floor. The next step involved submitting a phony complaint to the corporate office on a hot day, posing as a customer. I demanded to know how such a filthy establishment could remain unaddressed for so long. I emphasized that it smelled of damp mold. They said they would follow up with me, but I told them not to bother, as I would not return as a customer. The third step was to report them to WorkSafe, the Governmental Safety Board for Workers. I requested to remain anonymous and included the photo. I informed them about the faulty ovens, the defective mixing bowl, and also mentioned other issues at the main store. However, since I had not worked there in months, I could not provide current information. But I did mention a loose drain cover that the manager had merely told us to return to place so nobody injures themselves, instead of fixing the actual issue. As such, it was prone to coming loose if stepped on or rolled over incorrectly with the bin. They arrived at the sister store and closed it down in less than 20 minutes. There were numerous issues, likely many more than I had reported. The establishment was a disaster, and it was evident they were not taking the situation lightly. I had a few days off, and during that time, I learned that the main store had also been shut down due to discovered rust inside and mold within the fans of the proofers, effectively dispersing mold spores over the products intended for the following day. Both locations were closed. The owner would face costs in the tens, if not hundreds, of thousands of dollars for machinery, flooring replacements, and fines. The owner blamed Josh entirely for the situation, largely because the new hire shifted all the blame onto him. However, if he had correctly assessed the situation, he wouldn't have jeopardized his own business. Everyone employed there received severance packages, including the new hire, but at least I can take comfort knowing I will not have to work alongside him again. I would rather do anything else than endure that again. Edit, here is the image I captured. Observe the small water accumulation behind me on the right, along with the rust visible near the pipe. Edit 2, I didn't anticipate this gaining so much traction. I am now at a new job, but will respond to everything in around 9 hours to clarify some of the points raised in the comments. For the record, Josh's legal situation remains ongoing. Edit 3 FAQ and final edit until the legal case concludes. Q, was this Brumby's baker's delight? I do not believe I am permitted to disclose which one due to subreddit regulations. However, I will mention that I was looking for employment at Brumby's after this incident. Q, what is a retarder prover? A prover is essentially a warm, humid space to activate the yeast and allow the bread dough to rise. A retarder works similarly but also functions as a refrigerator, preventing the yeast from activating until we are ready to use it. This enables us to prepare the next day's dough today and bake it the following day, saving plenty of time. Q, what became of the new hire? Why was he not targeted for revenge? I was unable to take any action against him as I was employed at the sister store, located 20 minutes away. I wish I knew what ultimately transpired. I like to think that having 3 bakeries close in quick succession, combined with his criminal history, made it difficult for him to secure further employment. Q, what is happening with Josh? The legal case is still in progress. However, he has found new employment since this incident, and he is earning more than I am at present, which is somewhat frustrating. Q, why didn't you report the terrible conditions at the store sooner? I was in desperate need of work when I first came aboard and spent a great deal of time primarily at the main store, which was reasonably well maintained. Aside from some issues I deemed minor, one does not typically sustain an injury on the grate unless done deliberately, and truthfully, it was an easy fix if the manager had truly desired it. When I was reassigned to the sister store, I perceived it as a warning and was anxious about my job security. Upon reflection, I wasn't comfortable then, and I still feel uneasy about it now. Nevertheless, bakers know bakers. If I had reported the issues, it would not have taken long for my career to be over. I would have had no chance of finding work as a baker again if it became known that I reported the workplace. I essentially prioritized my job security and a steady income. I won't claim that I was right in my decision, but I doubt there exists a bakery or baker without flaws. I assure you that if you frequently purchase bread from a bakery, there is a high likelihood, around 70%, that you have consumed food that has been dropped on the floor, brushed off, and resold.